Namaste. Welcome, beautiful souls. In today's deck comparison, I will be having a look at the Tarot of A.E. Waite, which is on the table, alongside the Centennial Waite Smith and the Pamela Colman Smith RWS. This is a Los Scarabeo publication. This is a US Games publication, and the one on the table is AGM. I will be commenting on subtle nuances among these three versions of this beloved popular tarot deck. In the not too distant future, I will also have a look at this deck alongside the Tarot 1909. So let's get to the cards. As I mentioned, the Tarot of A.E. Waite is an AGM publication, AGM Urania, and I have had the German version for some time. And recently the French version came to me, and that's a whole other story. But I thought quickly here today I would just comment on the differences between these two decks. Now, granted, I have had the German one for a while, and the French one is, like I said, new to me. The box is a little bit different. So there is a sticker, some sort of shiny feature on the box, but it is the same two-part box. The decks come with a lovely bronze crackle back. And in going through the two decks, I have to say I do prefer the font on the German deck. Sitting side by side here, the German pile is slightly higher than the French pile. So I'm guessing that there has been a paper change, maybe even a printer change. As for color, it is almost identical. There are, however, a few cards, and one of them that comes to mind is the wheel card. And there's something quite different in the wheel card. So let me just get to that. This one looks very familiar. It has sort of a flat color on the interior wheel. And in the German deck, it is textured, which is quite different. And there are some richer colors in this particular variation. One card that comes to mind is the 8 of Cups. That was a good one. So here's the 8 of Cups, and you can see that we are definitely in a nighttime sky, which I absolutely love. And in the French version, the color is much lighter. And I think you can see that on the screen. But other than that, the differences are very subtle and not really worth mentioning. As mentioned, this is the Tarot of A.E. Waite, Centennial Tarot, and the Pamela Colman Smith RWS Tarot on the right. This is a Los Scarabeo publication on the right. In the center is US Games, and on the left is AGM Urania. To my knowledge, all are still presently available. And I will compare this deck on the right to the 1909 and probably alongside the plaid backs as well too. So you can have a look at the current version of the plaid backs with these two decks as well too. So let's turn this over and start with the Fool. For my tarot classes, I have been primarily using the Centennial Waite Smith. It is a favorite. It does have a muted filter on it. You can see it's not quite as bright as the deck on the left or on the right. Although you can't see this on camera, this central pile is quite a bit higher than the other two piles. The US Games cardstock is quite thick, which does make it a little more difficult to shuffle. And the one on the right, the Los Scarabeo deck, is a little bit narrower, and it's definitely not as thick cardstock. Both of the decks, left and right, are certainly brighter than the one in the center. And you can see right away we have subtle differences in color. And the reason I like to compare and contrast versions of decks is because these shifts in color may very well influence a reading. There is different energy with brilliant orange as opposed to muted orange, and often we'll see in a deck that the orange itself has been shifted to a bright red. And my eyes are moving toward the red earth here, which feels very different from the more barren landscape that I'm looking at in the deck in the center and the left. So I invite you to take your time with this and see which variation speaks to you. And if you pick up on different energy with these subtle color shifts, and I'll do my best to point out anything that I notice. Now, I am noticing there's something that's happened with this particular deck. Because it is narrower, it feels like there is a proportion change. So there's a narrower face. Something doesn't feel quite right in this deck. So it's going to be interesting to compare this with the other variations that have the same back. I did videos some years ago comparing some borderless decks as well too, so I'll be sure to link that below. It is with this deck, I think, important to have borders. With the borderless decks tended to, in my opinion, obscure the shape of the cards. You may have a preference for subtle greens and blues, and that may also affect your impression. Now, usually within any given deck, the changes will be consistent across the cards, but I think it's important to look at that as well too, because color is energy, and we pick up on that. Our eyes get attracted to certain things. And even looking at the crown of the Empress, I'm seeing subtle differences in the lighting, in the coloring of the lower part of the tiara. I've looked at this deck for so many years, and I really do enjoy noticing new things. In the deck on the far right, there is a clear distinction where the river and the forest are on the far right, whereas in the deck on the left, it feels a little bit more obscure. And I don't know if you can see here, and maybe this is just a proportion thing, but the Empress's scepter is right up against the crown. Her hand is on her face, and on the deck on the far right, there's a space between the scepter and the crown. So it's not just color. Pay attention to shifts in proportion, details that might feel more significant. If the card has changed in size, anything might happen here. Red is such an important color in the tarot. There are more Marshall decans than any other planet. Red is a color of action and masculinity and movement and purpose. And I have to say, it's one of the colors that I do notice the most and I do pay most attention to. Also in this deck, the contrast between black and white in some cards is really important. Now this card is really interesting because the skin tone is very different in each of these cards. The energy of the mountain feels different. And there's a real intensity, saturation to the angel in the deck on the right. There's something about the deck on the right. I feel like the faces have also been touched up. It's not just a proportion thing. There's some kind of a shift with the details on the faces. And now I'm looking at the left shoulder of the charioteer, and I see that there's also changes in this smaller deck. So I invite you to reflect on how the shift in color affects you, whether it is in the background, in the landscape, or in the foreground. Maybe it's in a subtle difference in texture. How do you respond to that? And the shift in proportion in the deck on the right, how is that sitting with you right now? One of the effects of the filter in the Centennial Waite Smith is the graininess of the background, and I do really like that. The color is definitely more solid in the deck on the left and the right. And if you have a favorite variation of this deck, please let me know what it is and what it is that you like about it. And for some people, it may be a cardstock choice. It might have to do with availability, or it was their first deck. And later on, I will compare more obvious color changes, such as the Wiser Tarot, the Universal Tarot, things like that. There is a consistency in the difference in color. I may go dizzy looking so closely at these cards. I do see several differences among these cards. Lots of saturation here, but almost too much. The face color looks a little odd. And I have to say, I really do prefer more of a purple veil behind justice. It has to do with this blending of blues and reds and what justice represents. There are other subtle differences as well too. I'm going to say that the dots on the pillars, the marks on the pillars, is different in all of these cards. Do you prefer the more greeny tones or the more blue tones? And you'll notice Centennial is a little more intense with its blues, and the Tarot of A.E. Waite is a little lighter. The color of the branches is quite different as well too. And we'll see that when we get to the Suit of Wands. Sometimes when we bump the color, it helps us to notice details that we may not otherwise notice. For example, the ship on the river in the Pamela Colman Smith RWS is colored red. We don't see that level of color in either the deck in the center or on the left. And similarly on the ground. And so there is a consistency with the greens and the blues. And if you prefer one color over the other, then it might be easy to make a choice. Skin color. So even the devil's skin color looks quite different in the three decks. So what do you notice in the Tower? What is an obvious difference? I would say that the lightning bolt is narrower and the yods are definitely smaller in the deck on the right. Interestingly, these three cards look very similar, except for the difference in green-blue in the sky. Look closely at the face of the sun. What do you notice? Also, the banner, the length of the banner, the position of the banner, the texture of the fabric. There are some differences here. So let me know what stands out for you when you gaze at these subtle differences. And oddly, in this final arcanum, the intensity of color seems to go to the Centennial Waite Smith. And it looks like all three of them have a purple bit of fabric across the figure in the center. Here are the suit of wands. So again, here you can look at the different colors of wood for the wands, the different greens and blues, color differences in the background and foreground. It's almost like this one is overlit. Redder red. And almost yellowy green over the left shoulder. And I did a size comparison between the deck on the right. These two are the same size, the AGM deck and the US Games deck. The foreground is less complex in this card. And all three cards have a very different color in the background. Interesting. You may have a favorite card. Like I really like the Eight of Cups in this deck. But would that be enough to say that this is my favorite variation of the three decks on the table? Six of Wands. I'm also looking forward to comparing and contrasting these decks with some of the more close-up ones as well too. And I know this is not everyone's cup of tea and not everybody studies this deck so closely, but this is, for me, a valuable exercise. Wow, look how different the clothing is. The color of the wands is not so different as it was in the Hanged Man card. Some of the yellows are quite different. Very bright yellow here. So this exercise might be important if you are choosing your first Waite Smith deck, if you haven't seen or thought about these variations, these subtle differences among different printers. And all of this becomes much more obvious when we look at decks that have had more obvious color changes. Do you prefer a deck that is more in focus? Because when I look at the deck on the left, it definitely appears to be more in focus than the deck in the center. And honestly, I feel like there's something kind of weird with the proportion of the deck on the right. Wow, look at how different the fabric is in these three decks. And so it'll be kind of fun to do this with the plaid backs in this deck as well too. This is the card I was talking about. I really like this color. There are so many cards in the Waite-Smith Tarot that I see as a nighttime card that don't look like a nighttime card. And I think it'd be really cool if the lunar Decan cards were all nighttime and the solar Decan cards were all daytime, things like that. I can't say I've ever noticed the ribbing in the leggings before in this card. And the flowers and the choices of color on the tunics probably are important. And lots of changes with these three decks in that regard. Knight of Cups. And I have another question for you. When you are working with this deck, if you work with astrological associations, is Knight of Cups Scorpio or Pisces? Let me know in the comments below. The cherubs actually have color in this one. Let's see, in this, I can see the full fish. The fish's tail is cut off here, and then we only see the head of the fish. The ship looks a little different in all three cards as well, too. It's amazing. Wow, I didn't realize there were so many differences. Okay, almost there. I can't see the light emanating around the hand in the deck on the right. And this one also has that lovely rich color that the Eight of Cups did, or near to it, on a very bright white stage. Three of Swords. Is there anything you notice in the stained glass window that looks different in the three cards? And I know probably you would need a magnifying glass to do that. But most of the time, we're not reading with magnifying glasses when we're reading the tarot. So does any of this make a difference to you? And I guess that is the most important question. Is the difference in color, is the shift in color enough to make a difference in a reading? And I think that might be personal as well, too. Also might have to do with your level of experience with this deck, your comfort with this deck, your curiosity with its hidden Easter eggs. And wowza. So here is a card that is just got so much red in it. And the red for me is important. In this card, the red robe, I think it depicts an energy, a determination to move through this. It really speaks to the energy of and the movement of the number 8. But wow, that is very, very bright red for a card that is not a Marshall Decan. Do you notice anything on the quilt? I'm absolutely fascinated with the fabric on the Queen's robes. I would love to have a closer look at them in one deck. Look at the details. I really like the Queen of Cups, what she wears. And there's something very different here about the energy of the King of Swords in this card. This one appears quite stern. It's almost like the facial expression has been changed. Okay, and final suit. I hope you're making some notes to share with me, or making your comment as you go. And thank you very much if you're still here. Your commenting, subscribing, liking is also greatly appreciated. What is your greatest impression in looking at these differences? This piece of fabric looks so different. You can see the snow falling on the fabric. I feel like there's a lot of artistic license with the deck on the right. And I'm not sure I'd realized that before. It's not one that I use very often, so that may be why. And this is a very important card for me. I really do like this card on so many levels. It is one that has always given powerful information in a reading. Again, I feel like too much artistic license in this deck, and this surprises me. The child's cut off in this one here. What's your favorite card in the Waite-Smith Tarot? All right, so I will be comparing other Waite-Smith inspired decks. Waite-Smith, just a second, I seem to have gotten ahead here. That's okay. Let's just go on. I will be comparing other variations of this deck, and then I will go on to decks inspired by the Waite-Smiths. So there's going to be lots of time for comparing and contrasting various discussions. And so far, I'm not really crazy about the use of red in this variation. It's too much. And the King of Pentacles. Okay. All right, so that's a wrap. Let me know if this is useful and what you might do with this information. Thank you for watching. Namaste.